Over the past few years, there's been a lot of buzz in the adventure biking scene in India. You see, motorcyclists are starting to acknowledge that adventure is a lot more accessible than a racetrack in this country. Although that realization doesn't quite reflect on sales charts as of now, it is a start nonetheless. And it helps that buyers have a lot of options to choose from today. Royal Enfield brought in the Himalayan in 2016, and although it was plagued with a lot of teething issues to start with, they have been ironed out over the years. Last year, Hero brought in the Xpulse 200 and BMW brought in the G310 GS. While the former catered to the entry-level category, the latter addressed a premium segment. And after a long wait, KTM brought in the 390 Adventure earlier this year. With the launch, there was a lot of controversy, especially regarding its off-road capability, but there is no denying that it is quite a wholesome product nonetheless. Now KTM has brought in the 250 Adventure, the smaller, more accessible adventure offering from their range. What we are going to do is spend some time with it and find out how it rides.
The KTM 250 Adventure may be more accessible in terms of its price, and we will get to that a bit later, but it isn't accessible in the literal sense due to its dimensions. The quarter-liter Adventure is identical in size to its larger sibling, which means that the 855 seat height is going to be a challenge for an average heighted Indian even on this one. The handlebar puts you in a comfortable riding position, but it feels a bit too low while riding off-road. In terms of its other dimensions too, the 250 ADV is identical to its more powerful sibling. In fact, it even looks exactly the same with the exception of a few differences. The 250 Adventure misses out on the LED headlamps and makes do with a halogen setup with LED DRLs. In the interest of saving cost, the 250 ADV also gets MRF tires instead of the Metzeler rubber. They are the same size though, 190 at the front and 130/80 at the rear. The TFT display from 390 is absent here. The 250 Adventure makes do with an LCD display without Bluetooth connectivity and navigation. In almost every other way, the 250 Adventure is identical to the 390 ADV. This one too gets the 2-step adjustable windscreen, 12-volt charging socket, the toothed foot pegs, as well as the LED tail light. It does, however, fall behind in terms of tech and misses out on the 3-axis IMU with cornering ABS and traction control.
Powering the 250 Adventure is the same 248.8cc single-cylinder liquid-cooled motor from the 250 Duke. In fact, in this motorcycle too, it makes about 29.6 bhp and 24 Nm. The engine tune is absolutely the same, and in fact, the final drive ratio is unchanged as well. There's barely any punch lower down in the rev range, and the engine only comes into its element once you're past the 4000 RPM mark. It revs freely right up to its red line, and overall performance is progressive too. In fact, the 250 Adventure, just like its naked sibling, feels its best in the 4 to 7000 RPM mark. Once you're past that, some amount of vibrations are felt on the seat as well as the foot pegs. Keeping that in mind, you would be best cruising at about 100-105 kmph, because beyond that, riding for long hours will leave you with a tingling, buzzing sensation on your hands and your feet. There's barely any punch lower in the rev range, and with that in mind, it demands constant gear shifts, especially while riding in the city. You have to always be in the right gear lest the motorcycle feel uneasy and even sluggish.
While your off-road adventures won't quite be as effortless as you would want them to be, with lesser power on offer than the 390, the quarter-liter ADV doesn't quite feel daunting. And despite the exclusion of the electronic safety net, you feel a bit more optimistic about opening the throttle over the rough stuff. The 250 Adventure is fairly accessible after all.
The 6-speed transmission works well, and the clutch action is light. The 6th cog is more of an overdrive, so while overtaking, you will find the need to downshift to 5th even when you're riding at speeds of about 70-75 km per hour.
The ride and handling department is where things get a bit more complicated for the 250 Adventure. Just like the 390, this one too sits on 43mm upside down forks and a monoshock at the rear with 170mm and 177mm of travel respectively. There's a firmness to the setup that does not go unnoticed, both in a good way and bad. The 250 Adventure tips into corners with ease and feels impressively well balanced. Even with its tall riding stance, it is easy to get into a nice rhythm while riding on hilly roads, and it doesn't get nervous even if you encounter mid-corner bumps. On the flip side, however, the rigid suspension has a ripple effect on the ride quality. The 250 ADV feels a tad bit too harsh while off-roading or riding over long stretches of broken roads. Braking hardware is identical to the 390 Adventure as well. A 320mm disc at the front and a 230mm one at the rear, giving it good stopping power. The MRF tires performed well in the wet weather conditions we encountered and even under braking.
Let me set the record straight right at the onset. If you're looking for an off-road motorcycle, one that will teach you the tricks of the trade, the 250 Adventure, just like the 390 ADV, isn't the best choice you can make. You'd be much better off investing in the X-Pulse or the Himalayan instead. That's not to say that the 250 Adventure cannot off-road. You can find your thrills riding on some fast dirt trails.
And it feels a lot less intimidating than the 390 ADV while doing so too.
It is on the road and around corners that the 250 Adventure really shines bright. Its upright stance and its punchy motor makes it a comfortable and enjoyable touring machine. And despite its tall stance and the long wheelbase, it feels absolutely at home attacking corners. If you're looking at the 250 Duke, you may want to consider spending an extra $32,000 for a more practical 250 Adventure. And for those who find the 3.06 lakh price of 390 Adventure a bit too out of reach, the 250 Adventure is a spiritual light version, if you will, at a more accessible and affordable price tag.